We are getting closer and closer to Alberta's election date. Here in Lethbridge, the lawn signs are up and door knockers are knocking and talking with residents to find out what their voter intention is. One Albertan that is close to the pulse of the voters' intention for Monday, May 29th is Vince Byfield. He joins me now from Edmonton. Vince, welcome back to Bridge City News. Great to have you on.
Great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure, Vince. Now, you are in Edmonton, and traditionally Edmonton has voted NDP in the provincial election, yet Conservative in the federal elections. Why do you think there is such a difference between the provincial and federal election outcomes?
Well, there's a few reasons for that. First of all, it hasn't always voted NDP. It has lately voted NDP, especially in the last two elections, 2019 and 2015. But starting in around the mid-'80s, that was when they had their big breakthrough. So there's a few things that have to happen for the NDP to do well in Edmonton. A big one is low voter turnout. The lower the turnout, the better the odds for the NDP.
Wow.
That's number one. And I would argue that in the last election and the one prior to that, the NDP have successfully persuaded a lot of Conservatives in Edmonton that it doesn't really matter, their vote doesn't really matter, and they just don't even come to the polls. And so I think that's why we, right now, as you know, but maybe the average person watching doesn't know, 19 of the 20 Edmonton seats are NDP seats. So we comprise pretty much 3/4 of the NDP caucus coming out of Edmonton. There's only one UCP candidate, and that would be Casey Madhu, the deputy premier. But that hasn't always been the case. In fact, Edmonton traditionally was at least half Conservative, and prior to that, Social Credit. And I have a strong suspicion that we're making our way back there. It's just a question of whether enough Edmontonians show up to vote and understand the gravity of the matter at hand.
So, I mean, this campaign is getting very fiery as of late between Danielle Smith and Rachel Notley. What do you think the voter turnout would look like in Edmonton?
My suspicion is it's going to be high, and I strongly suspect we're going to have very tight races. In the lead up to this, just for the UCP, all over the province, the candidate races, just to be the candidate for the UCP, we had at least 4 that were within 10 votes, and a couple of them were within 2 votes of winning. And it wouldn't surprise me at all in Edmonton if we have some that come down to a handful of votes.
So from those who you've been talking to, do you feel that voters think that this election is a lock for their favorite party or candidate?
Not at all. No. Even 338 is now adjusting a number of the seats for Edmonton from sure bets for the NDP to likely for the NDP. And just going around Edmonton looking at signage, I'm seeing a lot more UCP signage than in the past. But signage, can be misleading. When you're talking the major arteries, basically it's whoever can afford the most signs for that. What's much more telling is how many signs you see on people's lawns, because each one of those represents the permission of the tenant or owner of that property. I wouldn't say that it's the NDP are still very, very predominant, no question. But the UCPs, I'm in McClung on the west side of Edmonton, and I'd say it's about 50-50 right now. So, and I think that's in large part the case. Just going from door to door, when you're talking on behalf of the UCP, we typically see 39%, say 30 at over a third that are leaning for us, and then maybe a quarter that are leaning for the NDP. But we identify ourselves as UCP, so therefore it's very unlikely that there's going to be some NDP who just don't want to share their views with a UCP person. So it's going to be tight. I'm pretty sure it's going to be tight. except for some of the central constituencies. Like I really don't see Rachel having a challenge in Strathcona, and city centre. Likewise, those are probably going to still be strong NDP wins, but it's the ones around the Henday, both in and out, that are up for grabs at this point, I think.
So you touched on election signs and how they're not an accurate indication. Now let's talk about polling, because one thing we can count on during election time are the pollsters showing percentages and party lines among voters. But polls always have a margin of error. So based on what you've been hearing, do you think the polling in this election is accurate?
There's only one poll that matters, and that's going to be the one on May 29th. And I find that polling is a pretty loose science at best. You know, a lot of it comes down to who you question, how you question, what you question, and typically you find that, you know, the UCP come out with numbers that, well, look at that, favoring the UCP, and the NDP do the same. So all I know is that it sells papers, it brings up views, but at the same time, I see, you'll notice now that they're showing more often that it's looking more and more like Danielle Smith's going to pull it off, and the UCP are going to win. And I've seen that pretty much since last fall. Quite frankly, I said at the time of the AGM, if the two big factions within the UCP can learn to get along and work together, they'll form government. And if they can't, then they won't. And they've gotten along for the most part. And so I think there's a very good chance that they're going to form government. The question that should be on the minds of Edmontonians is, do they want to have another 19 seats sitting in opposition, languishing in backbenches on the opposition, or do they want to have a seat at the table of government? Really, that's what it's going to come down to. And hopefully, more and more of them will see the light, and Edmonton will go back to its traditional role of having at least half Conservatives and half others. So.
And why do you think we haven't seen the smaller fringe parties making any inroads in this election?
For what I said before, which was the two big factions. Traditionally, I'll say it this way: within the UCP, there are factions, and the two big ones, I think, in large part, centered around COVID. There were people who were against mandatory vaccination and masking and things like that, and there were people who were in favor of it. Mm-hmm. One argued that it was better for security. One argued that it was too high a price on freedom. Those two groups got together and made peace. And if they can make peace, then they can form government. And by doing that, that really muzzled a lot of the other parties, especially the Independence Party that was flaring up. And so now they're always going to be a factor, but I'd be surprised if they take more than 10% collectively of the vote. So.
And how big of a factor has the provincial NDP connection to the federal NDP and Liberal Coalition been so far?
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk to NDP at the door, and for them, it's not a big factor. It is a big factor for Conservatives, and I'd say the average Albertan does not put Justin Trudeau at the top of their prayer list. Let's put it that way. But they should. But nonetheless, affiliating the NDP more and more with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals and federally has definitely helped persuade that swing voter. I'm still waiting. Traditionally, what the NDP does in the last few weeks of the election is throw out serious, quote unquote, dirt, and hopefully that shock value will have enough time for them. That's what they hope, is that it will have enough shock value to resonate with the average swing voter. I don't think it's going to work this time. And this latest salvo that they had is essentially a rehash of an old salvo. So it tells me they're running out of ammo, which is probably a good thing for the UCP.
Yeah, because one thing that was raised at a Lethbridge Candidates Forum this week was the attack ads that most have not have seen during this election period. You've observed this as well, and so you feel that that the parties are running out of ammo. But do you feel that these type of ads have impacted voters' opinion of the candidates?
No, no. I think the average voter is wiser than in the past. There, you never can tell. I think that Danielle Smith and the UCP have done a really good job of hammering home what matters. You know, it's the economy, right? Period. Period. You know, everything else. And as long as they're able to show that of the two parties, the one that has the much better track record in terms of maintaining and growing the economy, well, that would be the UCP. And I think that the average voter sees that, and it will play out certainly in the rural areas, and I think much more so in Calgary and in Edmonton than it has in past recent elections.
Interesting. And talking about Danielle Smith, and actually both leaders, actually, how do you feel that Danielle Smith has been doing in this campaign? And then we'll talk about Rachel Notley afterwards.
I think she's done a superb job, quite frankly. Is she perfect? No. Who is? Right? I think that Rachel has been giving many opportunities for the UCP to take her down a peg or two. You know, this barring journalists from press scrums at the very and saying at that very same press scrum that you're welcoming all journalists. That's you know, the UCP have been able to make much out of that, and that was of their own doing, right? So I don't unless she can pull a rabbit out of the hat, I don't think the NDP have this.
And so let's talk about Rachel Notley then. Do you think she's doing well? Or have you seen her message or tactics change?
The question is not so much is she doing well, is there an obvious person to replace Rachel? And I don't think that there is really. There are a few bright lights in the NDP scene, but I don't know if any of them will be able to command enough. Rachel has been around a long time. They've tied a lot of the NDP brand to the Rachel Notley brand, right? So they'd have to, you know, I think that's really kind of tied them to her, whether they like it or not. So unless it's very possible that in fact, it's probable that there will be some sort of leadership contention after, but well, unless of course she wins. If she wins, then all is forgiven. But I don't think there's an obvious leadership contender waiting in the wings to take her out.
As we get closer to Election Day, what should voters be looking for?
Number one, getting out and voting. I think that this is probably the most important election that we have ever had in this province in terms of what's at stake. Right now, we have a federal government that is determined to dismantle our engine, our economic engine, and that's very serious. Number two is that it's going to be very tight in a lot of areas, not so much probably in the rural areas, but in the municipal areas. This could be an election where your vote, Irfan, is the vote in your riding, right? It could come down to a single vote. And if you're at home that you decide to, you know, not show up at the polls that day, that's going to be quite a psychological load to carry for the next 4 years, knowing that had you shown up, you could have tilted the balance. So this is, I think, going to be one of the most exciting elections we've ever had.
Absolutely, Vince. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Always a pleasure to be on. You guys take care and enjoy the election and get out and vote, all of you.
Absolutely. That was Vince Byfield. He joined us from his office in Edmonton. I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.